Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this event. My name is Bonnie Brooks. I am a research associate at the Public Policy Institute of California's Higher Education Policy Center, and I would like to welcome you all to today's program. So we just released a report a few weeks back entitled Supporting Student Parents in Community College CalWORKs Programs. And this report, along with the technical appendices and the slides from today's presentation, will be available on our website at ppic.org. And before I begin today, we'd like to thank a few people. First, our funders, the ECMC Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, and the Sutton Family Fund for their support of this work, as well as this virtual event. And the California Community College Chancellor's Office for granting us the student level longitudinal data system that's foundational to our work. And finally, the program coordinators that we surveyed for their invaluable insights for our research. So today's program, I will walk you through some of our main findings in the report, and then I will invite my colleague Shannon McConville to join me for a discussion of our key takeaways. And finally, we will answer any and all audience questions. So if you have a question for Shannon and myself, please send an email to the address on screen, which reads ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And we would appreciate if you include your name as well as your organization along with your question. And without any further ado, I shall begin my presentation. So the California Work Opportunity and Responsive, oops, I just realized I'm not sharing my screen. So before I begin, sorry about that. All right, so just to reiterate, if you have any questions that you'd like to submit to Shannon and myself, please submit your questions here, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And yeah, so without further ado, sorry about that again, I shall begin the presentation. So the California Work Opportunity and Responsibility to Kids program, which I'll refer to as CalWORKs, is the California version of the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program that provides cash assistance to families with dependent children who have very low incomes that are well below the poverty thresholds. About 10 to 15% of CalWORKs adults enroll in the California community colleges in any given year. So we see around 20,000 CalWORKs adults enrolled in the 2018-19 academic year, in fact. So given the current economic downturn brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, the CalWORKs caseload is projected to double in the fiscal year 2020 and 2021. And with it, an influx of these adults turning to higher education to increase their skills while jobs are scarce. So the community college system in California is well positioned to help support CalWORKs recipients and facilitate their economic mobility, namely by providing educational and vocational training that can fulfill CalWORKs work requirements, and by also providing additional service and support programs designed to address challenges that this specific student population faces. So the goal of our research that I'll be presenting today is to investigate how the California community college system builds skills and credentials that will help support the economic mobility of CalWORKs student parents. So who exactly are our CalWORKs students? So I'll define CalWORKs student as a student that receives county CalWORKs benefits while also enrolled in a community college CalWORKs program, and a student who's enrolled for the first time in a CalWORKs program in the community colleges between the 2012-13 and 2016-17 academic school years. So compared to the rest of the community college population, CalWORKs students are more likely to be considerably older. We see about 7 out of 10 students in our CalWORKs student population are 25 years and older. We also find that they're more likely to be Latino or African American, with about 70% of our population being either or. And they're also more likely to be single mothers. So over 2/3 of our CalWORKs student population are single mothers. And we also find that our CalWORKs student population largely mirrors the overall adult CalWORKs population in the state. So our CalWORKs student population amounts to around 43,500 students enrolled in CalWORKs programs between 2013 and 2017. And when we look at their enrollment patterns, we find that on average, CalWORKs students are enrolled in more than 6 terms throughout their community college career, earning nearly 40 units total. And we find that CalWORKs students enrolled in 4 terms of a CalWORKs program and completed 27 units while enrolled in the program, which is indicated in the middle box in this slide. Students also enrolled before and after joining the CalWORKs program, which goes to signal that they may be attending the community colleges beyond fulfilling the requirements to receive CalWORKs assistance. So for instance, we see that 41% of CalWORKs students enrolled in at least 1 term in the 2 academic years before they entered a college CalWORKs program. And that's indicated in the leftmost box in the slide. And they earn about an average of 2.6, with an average of 2.6 terms enrolled. And then likewise, we see that 36% of CalWORKs students continue at community colleges in the 2 years after they exit the CalWORKs program, which is indicated in the rightmost box. And when we look into the course load of our CalWORKs student population, we find that these students earn about 1/3 of their units in career education programs, such as business and health, with slightly higher shares in the 2 years after they exit the college CalWORKs program. So we also see that about 45% of completed credits are in non-career education fields, which are indicated in the light blue-green boxes. And these fields are predominantly the humanities as well as interdisciplinary studies. And we see that about another 20 to 25% of completed units are in math and English courses, which are indicated in the dark blue-green boxes at the top. And we see that about half of those courses are in remedial or developmental education, for which students do not receive college credit. And for those CalWORKs students that are focused on career education, the 2 leading fields of study for these students were business and family and consumer sciences. And family and consumer sciences includes disciplines such as early childhood education. So among our CalWORKs student population, we find that completion rates were relatively low. Around 27% completed a credential or transferred to a 4-year program or 4-year college within 3 years of entering a college CalWORKs program. And we find that students that completed most of their coursework in career education programs were slightly more likely to finish a credential compared to other CalWORKs students. More specifically, we see that these students were 13% more likely to complete a short-term certificate and 10% more likely to complete a long-term certificate compared to all CalWORKs students. So the California Community College CalWORKs programs get dedicated funding from both Proposition 98 as well as the federal TANF program to provide specialized services for students receiving CalWORKs. However, with the student level longitudinal data provided to us by the Chancellor's Office, we're not exactly able to know the granular detail as to what these CalWORKs programs look like on a campus by campus basis. So to bridge that gap, we conducted a survey of CalWORKs program directors, and we received responses from 52 colleges, which enrolled about half of CalWORKs students across the system in the 2018-19 academic year. And we asked a variety of questions in this survey, from the types of services offered to the goals of the program according to the program coordinators. And we find that a majority of CalWORKs program directors indicated that CalWORKs student well-being, persistence to the next term, and career readiness were among the top 3 goals of the program. We also found that colleges offer a wide array of services, but there are some core services provided across all campuses in their CalWORKs programs. And these are namely case management, academic counseling, and work study, just to name a few. And beyond the core supports mentioned in my previous slide, colleges, like I said, offered a wide array of services that tailor their programs to the specific needs of CalWORKs students. We asked about more than 20 different services in our survey, and we highlight 9 here on the screen today. And we asked program coordinators about how services offered are used by students. More specifically, if more than half or almost all CalWORKs students use a given service, which we refer to as high usage, and that's indicated in the orange bars. And or if little or no CalWORKs students use a given service, and we term this as low usage, and that's indicated by the light blue-green bars. So we find that transportation assistance appears to be the most widely used service, with more than 70% of CalWORKs students attending a college where most CalWORKs students use that service. We find that 30% of students are enrolled at colleges that offer housing assistance, but very few, around 3%, attend a college that reports high usage of that service. And likewise, on-campus child care centers are available to nearly 60% of CalWORKs students, but only 6% of programs report high usage of that service. And while CalWORKs programs can provide a wide variety of services, many of these programs may face capacity constraints for certain services due to things like funding and program limitations, meaning that students can be denied certain services despite needing them. And while few college programs report widespread constraints that limit student access to these needed supports, there are a few notable exceptions. We see that, for instance, work-study jobs, which is one of those core support services that I mentioned earlier that are offered by virtually all CalWORKs programs, were the most often cited as facing constraints, with more than 3/4 of colleges reporting so. And other services like laptop loans programs, child care centers, and housing assistance were also flagged by program coordinators as services that could be denied to students due to capacity constraints. And this is generally consistent with the patterns that we see in the previous figure, where colleges report offering these services, but very few report that most CalWORKs students are using these services. So while the overarching goal of the CalWORKs programs may be to facilitate earning credentials and transferring to four-year degrees, there are certain term level outcomes such as persisting to the next term, enrolling full-time, and successfully completing coursework that are intermediary steps that are necessary to support those objectives. So given that many of our CalWORKs students are enrolled in the community colleges, even when they're not enrolled in a CalWORKs program, we're able to examine these three key term level outcomes by comparing the terms students were enrolled in the CalWORKs programs, compare those to the terms where those same students were not enrolled in the CalWORKs program, so as to better understand how enrollment in the program may be related to student outcomes. So when we do that, we consistently see that students do better on these metrics of success while they're enrolled in the CalWORKs programs compared to the terms that they were not enrolled in the program. More specifically, we find that there's a 13% increase in the number of students successfully completing courses, a 25% increase in the number of students enrolling full-time, and an 11% increase in the numbers of students persisting to the next school term while they're enrolled in a CalWORKs program. And we also find that when students receive different types of financial aid, especially Pell Grants, there are relatively large improvements in these term level outcomes as well, suggesting that efforts to increase financial aid to more fully cover the cost of college could benefit CalWORKs students greatly. So all in all, we find that CalWORKs students have better outcomes in the terms that they're enrolled in CalWORKs. And the targeted supports that they have access to in these programs may play an important role in facilitating this success. However, there's more work that needs to be done in order to understand how specific student supports are related to success, because with the data that we have available to us for this study, we're not actually able to observe what specific supports students are taking up while they're in the CalWORKs program. In addition, it's also important to strengthen career pathways and connections to employment opportunities for this student group. The Guided Pathways Initiative, which is a structured approach being implemented across the community college system that's designed to connect students to clear pathways for attaining their career goals, should provide the tools and framework through enhanced advising and guidance to help facilitate that strengthening of career pathways. And we also want to explore policy levers that will help CalWORKs students complete middle and long-term goals. There's a few policy levers that are currently underway. One policy advanced by the Chancellor's Office as of right now to improve outcomes for CalWORKs students involves expanding financial aid resources to cover the total cost of college, which includes living expenses like housing costs. And another strategy advanced by the aforementioned Guided Pathways framework is to provide students early on with targeted guidance on how to achieve their career goals through education pathways. Okay, thank you all so much for your interest in this work. And I would now like to welcome my colleague, Shannon McConville, who's a Senior Research Associate at PPIC and my co-author on this report, to discuss some more key takeaways and to answer questions from the audience. Okay, hi Shannon. I believe you're muted.
Mute, yes.
There
Hi,
you
Bonnie.
go.
Well, thanks for the great presentation, and I'm looking forward to talking a bit more about some of the takeaways we want to highlight.
All right, so I guess let's just get right into it then. So as I mentioned, we see about 1/3 of CalWORKs students pursuing career education. So how can colleges strengthen the pathways, these career pathways for CalWORKs students and other low-income student parents?
No, that's and that's something that we really wanted to think about in this work. So this report is actually part of a series of work that PPIC is doing, investigating how community colleges' career education programs can support economic mobility broadly for Californians. And so in this piece, we really, are looking at a particular group of vulnerable Californians who have, low incomes, who we also know are student parents. And so trying to understand how career pathways may be able to improve their economic mobility. And so first, I would say kind of in our previous work, we detailed some of what we call high value credentials, or trying to understand which particular programs confer earnings increases for the students that complete them. And we do find that career education credentials on average boost earnings about 20%, but there are pretty big differences across the programs and the kind of credentials. And so that's the type of information that I think can help students and CalWORKs students and low-income student parents get connected, hopefully, to the programs and then employment opportunities that could provide for this economic mobility. And so a few more specifics. So by far, and I think probably a lot of our audience knows this, health credentials really do confer the largest value that we see. One thing I would note here is that when we looked at CalWORKs students in particular who pursued career education pathways, the career education program that they most often seem to be engaged with in terms of their course taking was business. And business is a pretty broad career education area. It includes things like accounting and other elements. Although in our previous work on the returns to credentials, we actually found business career education credentials didn't really confer much value to the students that complete them. And so, students need to be able to pursue the pathways that they want to. Obviously, interest is an important thing. So, we can't just move everyone into health or tell people, no, you can't do that. I mean, that's not the role. But I do think there are ways in which we can think about where career education programs that do seem to confer the value can get connected to the employment opportunities within a particular region where people are located. And hopefully that can help connect these students to to jobs that are available. We also highlight in the report, is there a way, especially given that CalWORKs program directors really highlighted this for us, to expand or increase the availability of work-study jobs? And so work-study is again a core element of all CalWORKs programs, as you mentioned. And we do, as a state, receive funding from the federal government to support federal work-study. That said, public two-year colleges are at a disadvantage for pulling down some of those federal work-study funds. So that's a challenge. That said, though, for CalWORKs students, say in particular, and perhaps other low-income student parents, there are these ways in which work experiences may be not as expansive, or there are additional what we call barriers to employment that may make it hard to connect with available job opportunities. And so to the extent that work-study can provide this very targeted way in which students and CalWORKs students in particular can gain work experience, I think that is an important thing. And again, we need to recognize that this is contingent on funding. Work-study positions are expensive. And so, given that we're in an economic downturn, those might be difficult. But those would be, kind of these two things. I'll just quickly mention too, the community college system does have a strong workforce funding to connect all students and colleges with job opportunities, employers, workforce development agencies. And so if there is a way that there can be some coordination in trying to target the the pathways that students are completing to where those opportunities may be, I think could also be helpful.
Yeah, that's all really important. And kind of relatedly, another question that I have is the CalWORKs caseload, as I mentioned, is expected to increase, especially with the economic downturn brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. So how do you see the community college system and state policymakers helping these low-income student parents not fall even further behind?
Right. So I think, I'll start with what the system level or kind of chancellor's office or the community college system, and where there could be some things that can be done. So in recent years, I would say all of the public higher education systems in the state have really acknowledged that student basic needs are a big part of it, the ability of students to complete college and earn credentials. And so, and when I say basic needs, I'm talking about stable housing, adequate food, those sorts of things. And so we clearly know that for probably a broad group of low-income student parents at the colleges, they do have those needs and limited supports. Here I'll say that, CalWORK students have a much broader access to things like that by virtue of being part of the CalWORKs program. So, in your presentation, you showed different services that were available through college CalWORKs programs. Many of those services, including transportation, food assistance, housing assistance, are available to CalWORKs students through county programs as well as supports there. So that's the other difficulty, not only in we don't necessarily know what individual students within the CalWORKs system receive from college CalWORKs programs there. We also don't know what other services, say through their county, CalWORKs benefits, so county benefits. So it may be that, high use for child care centers, we don't see a lot of high use, but that may very well be related because students have access to child care subsidies through the CalWORKs program and thus don't really need it from the college. And so that's what kind of makes it difficult for us to suss out which services may be contributing the most. But I think it's really important to know that for CalWORKs students, they do have this broader access to other supports. For other low-income student parents, I would say that's a lot, there's less of that. Although, college, I think most colleges, again, acknowledging that students have these needs that need to be met, have created programs for all students, right? So food pantries have become common at a lot of the colleges, and other ways that they can support, again, this broader group of low-income. And, in this work, we're focusing on student parents that may, that aren't receiving CalWORKs assistance and thus don't have access to these additional supports. I'd also just mention, I know, you mentioned some of the chancellor's office initiatives to cover the total cost of college. And while the community colleges we know are very low in fees and tuition relative to other four-year universities, the total cost of attending is actually quite high in many places in California because of the cost of living. And so to the extent that students can be supported more broadly about, with their, and in particular in California, their housing needs, I think can go a long way. You mentioned in our analysis, we found that financial aid receipts, independent of being enrolled in CalWORKs programs, was a pretty strong predictor of some of those term level outcomes, and it was even larger. And so by far, Pell Grants, federal Pell Grants are the largest source of financial aid that CalWORKs students receive. And a lot for those term level outcomes that we were interested in. Receipt of a Pell Grant increased persistence to the next term by almost 40%, so very sizable, and also successful completion of coursework by 30%. And what that suggests to me is that additional financial support would be helpful for CalWORKs students we see in this report, but you could also imagine a much broader group of students. And then I guess I'll pivot quickly to the state level policies, right? So that's all, and the chancellor's office and CalWORKs directors throughout the state, obviously are working on these things all the time to try to improve and figure out ways to help the students. But there is this role for state policy, especially oftentimes in terms of providing additional assistance. And so I would highlight one. So Governor Newsom just signed a bill, SB 1232, that will provide CalWORKs students with additional funds for every semester that they're enrolled at a public higher education institute, including the California community colleges. So up to $500 for every semester where they're making satisfactory progress. And in some cases, and I'm still learning more about the legislation, and are enrolled full-time, although I do believe there are opportunities for students enrolled part-time to also receive some of this additional funds. So this would just be essentially what it looks to be is a cash stipend that students would receive, that CalWORKs students would receive at the beginning of a term that could help support them throughout with expenses, whether those be books, whether that be other things that they need for their family. And, you know, as I said, with the effects that we find from just additional financial aid, something like that could really help students to kind of complete their courses and complete credentials.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap up, are there any other important takeaways that you'd like to highlight from our report?
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned it in your presentation, but it's important to also think about equity concerns. You know, as you said, Black and Latinx Californians are overrepresented among the state's poor. They're overrepresented in terms of their share of CalWORKs adults, so adults that are assisted in the state, and they're underrepresented in the state's higher education systems. And so I do think kind of moving forward, particularly given the downturn and the consequences of the COVID pandemic, that as, you know, policymakers and practitioners are thinking about how to try to have an equitable recovery, that it's important to think about that. You know, it's that all Californians can have access to the support they need to complete post-secondary training, both to improve their job market prospects, but also, you know, I just would also highlight, well, we're focused a lot on career education. It's also very important to think about opportunities for transfer for those four-year college degrees. PPIC's Higher Education Center has a broad range of research, and consistently that does detail the kind of continued advantages of four-year degrees for people who complete them. So yeah, I guess I will stop there. And I think we may have some questions from the audience that we can kind of transition to.
Yeah, let's see. We have one question here from a viewer in the Bay Area. Do you know which community colleges are having success as measured by 50% completion?
That's a good question, and we should be very clear about completion metrics that we're using. They're slightly different, or they are different than, say, what's included in the Chancellor's Office data mart. We're looking at we looked at the share of CalWORKs students who completed a credential, any type of credential, or any length of credential, a credit credential though, not non-credit credentials, or transferred to a four-year college within 3 years of their first enrollment in a CalWORKs program at the community colleges. And so that is different. Oftentimes the Chancellor's Office does a 6-year window, and they also are more restrictive on which students they're kind of tracking to see what the completion is. We don't look at specific colleges in our work. We do have access to that information, but we're really trying to think about the system broadly. In some of our statistical analysis, we did include marker or what we'll call indicators of whether certain colleges really stand out and change the effects that we saw of participation in CalWORKs programs, and that didn't change our results very much. So clearly there are ways, and I'm sure there are colleges that have, you know, these higher completion rates for CalWORKs, and that's important. We didn't really dig into that in this particular work.
Yeah, and actually another question we just got from a viewer in Chicago is kind of related to that. Were there noticeable differences on outcomes based on which California community colleges students attended? Size of college, location, etc. It seemed like some locations offered different services, offered services at different rates, but did that translate to success on target outcomes?
These are excellent questions.
Great questions.
I will say, and maybe I'll shoot it back to Bonnie for this, you know, we did want to look in our survey whether we saw differences in, say, the services that were offered amongst those that responded to our survey in terms of region or size of college in particular. And as I recall, we didn't see very big differences there, but I'll let Bonnie was managed our survey and kind of knows a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, I'll say that at least for our CalWORKs student sample, when we fielded the survey to program coordinators, we wanted to make sure we had representative sample of all regions. That way that we're able to like be able to make some make some comments and like have some observations that could theoretically like apply to like the larger CalWORKs population. Obviously, we don't have like 100% response rate. I mean, I think we only had like 52 colleges, like I had mentioned in the presentation, but they enrolled about half of CalWORKs of the student population, at least for the 2018-19 academic year. So so we can at least speak for those colleges.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Shannon had mentioned earlier, there are colleges that do offer like more services in some regions versus like, or in some colleges and less so in others. It really did depend on like where like a student went to school in order to like know what types of services they had access to. So yeah.
Great. I would also just follow up on that. So the analysis that we did where we were estimating what effect or what would that bar chart that showed kind of these percent increases in these different metrics when students were enrolled in a CalWORKs program, that analysis doesn't really allow us to put colleges or characteristics of colleges into the model we're using, because we're doing it based on, so those estimates are based on for an individual student, how their outcomes changed in the terms they were enrolled in a college CalWORKs program versus the terms they weren't enrolled in a college CalWORKs program, all within the same college. And so that analytic strategy kind of, it helps us in a lot of ways because there are plenty of things that we don't observe in our data that undoubtedly contribute to whether an individual student can meet these metrics, right? And so we feel like that's a great strategy. At the same time, because we use that strategy, we're not really able to say, tease out like, at certain colleges, do these students do better? I do think there's a way in the future that we could try to probe that a little bit more, but that's not included in this analysis.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we just got a question from a viewer from Sacramento. You mentioned capacity constraints surrounding work study for CalWORKs students. Do you see programs working to expand work study opportunities by placing students with small businesses and local nonprofits? Can going beyond campus jobs help to expand work study opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great that's a great insight. And so I will say this, what we are able to kind of observe both from the chancellor's office data that we have access to, as well as some of the analysis that they have done on work study, and we do detail some of this in the report. It seems only about 16% of CalWORKs students participate or are connected to work study opportunities while they're at the community colleges, and almost all of those are at the college. So there are very few that are being placed in work study positions that are outside the college. And you can imagine within the college, like on campus jobs, there's a wide range. So things from administrative, possibly working in childcare centers and other places where you can connect to the skill set that maybe you're working on while you're at the college. But we do highlight, and I think this was kind of thinking about how maybe some of the other efforts going on within the system to broaden support for connections to employers and other things. Are there ways that those could help CalWORKs students be placed outside, right? And I think you made a good point, say with nonprofits or other things, where they would have a broader opportunity to gain valuable work experience in these different settings, and more importantly, in actually private sector settings, which could really help in kind of moving as they move forward along a career or a job. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, let's see. We have another question from the LA area. With the college/cash grant the governor is proposing, will it count towards students' cash aid grant?
Yes. So, oh, sorry, I shouldn't say yes. I don't believe so. I can definitely look more, but I can say this, that when CalWORKs students typically receive other forms of aid, it is not counted against the cash assistance they receive through the CalWORKs program. And I believe that's a decision that that the state can make to say exclude or exempt that additional income. And so I don't know if there is as much detail. This is a pretty new legislation, so it will likely evolve as it becomes implemented. But I would assume, like other forms of assistance, that it should not count like as income that would then affect the level of cash that a CalWORKs student would be receiving from the CalWORKs program. That's a good question.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. One more question, an additional question from the audience. What were the years being evaluated by this project? How would you expect the ongoing COVID-19 crisis to affect this work? Greater access because of remote learning, more strains on the community college system due to budget concerns, etc. So I'll just say, like right off the bat, so the years that we examined in our study were students that were first enrolled in a community college CalWORKs program from the 2012-13 academic year to the 2016-17 academic year. So that's so yeah, well before the onset of the pandemic. But as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are projections that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to result in in the doubling of the CalWORKs caseload in the fiscal year 2020-2021. So we do at least anticipate more CalWORKs adults potentially turning to the higher education in general, but especially the community college system as that's just kind of how it goes. Like that's just the types of trends that we see. Usually when there's an economic downturn, adults tend to like go back to higher education. And yeah, so we do anticipate definitely more demand for these types of services, especially just given that, like I said, more CalWORKs adults are going to be turning to the higher education system. But Shannon, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just a couple things. So I will say that so that doubling of CalWORKs caseloads is from an earlier the budget documents from the governor. At least for the data that we have from the California Department of Social Services now, we haven't seen a big uptick in the CalWORKs caseload as was projected kind of in some of the budget documents, you know, and we're not sure maybe why that is. It could be that unemployment benefits are buffering some families and maybe we're going to see an uptick. I do think it's very reasonable to think that you will see more people in CalWORKs as a result of the pandemic, say over the next 1 or 2 years, and then subsequently more, as Bonnie mentioned, students availing themselves of opportunities to kind of increase their skill levels, to improve their prospects for jobs once we kind of move out of this. The only other thing I would highlight is we started looking in the 2012-2013 school year, because in 2013 there were some pretty big changes that the state made to the CalWORKs program. SB 1041, I believe, is what did it, and that's the state or county CalWORKs program that kind of changed some of the work requirements and some of the details that CalWORKs students faced. And so we didn't want to confuse that. So that's one of the reasons we started in 2012-2013. And we actually are able to follow students through 2018-19. That's the full year, because we did want to look a little bit at what happens in the 2 years prior to enrollment in college CalWORKs programs and 2 years after. So, the main analytic piece, assesses students over that entire time period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Bonnie covered most of it. It looks like we have another.
We have another question from a viewer in Berkeley. Which CalWORKs student parents, or will CalWORKs student parents be surveyed and see if goals and intentions of the CalWORKs coordinators are translated and understood by the student parent recipients? As in, do student parents have an understanding of all the resources they have access to? And that is an excellent question.
It is. And I will say this. So throughout our career education research agenda, we have this amazing data from the Chancellor's office. We've talked with a lot of people that are working in this space. The one voice that I would say we haven't probed or haven't really been able, or haven't incorporated beyond what we say observe in terms of outcomes for students, is what students know, how students and how CalWORKs students in particular, yes, avail themselves of what's available, of what may be available to them to help support their things. We also don't know with CalWORKs students, and again, I had mentioned this before, like how the county CalWORKs programs and the benefits they have there interact with the college CalWORKs programs. And it's clear, you know, from the, you know, various guidance that the case managers with the county space are working with the college CalWORKs program coordinators to help, you know, meet the goals that are laid out for CalWORKs students. But I do think that student perspective, I can say this, we are hoping in future work, that is definitely one of the places we would like to go. So that would be, you know, trying to run some focus groups and other things for particular students who, you know, to understand how they choose programs. Do they know about services that are available? What else do they need in order to succeed? And I think that, yeah, as Bonnie said, it's a great question. And it's one that we definitely is top of mind as we continue to think about what work we want to do in this space.
Mm-hmm. I will say in our survey, we did ask program coordinators how they reach out to potential like recipients or like participants in the CalWORKs program. And we do, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon, but I believe that one of the main ways that students learn about the program is through word of mouth and through things like brochures and like outreach in that type of way. So yeah, there can definitely be more to learn about how how CalWORKs programs are reaching out to potential participants, and what are the most effective ways of getting the word out about the existence of the program in general. So,
well, it looks like we maybe have a few more minutes, and it looks like maybe one more question. So we'll finish up with that.
Okay, so if you had one additional dream data source that would help you answer research questions that couldn't be studied right now, what would it be? The survey seems to fill in many blanks, but is there anything else that you wish you had more visibility on, such as raw earnings or employment data? I guess I'll say right off the bat, just knowing what specific services students are actually using, because yeah, like I had mentioned in the presentation, we don't actually know what specific services students are using. We just know that whether or not they're enrolled in a CalWORKs program, and if that particular CalWORKs program or the program coordinator for that CalWORKs program that a student's enrolled in indicates if students use a given service like highly or lowly. So it doesn't actually say, like, it's like a proxy for that, but it's not exactly like knowing that information. So so that would be mine, at least.
Right. And so I love thinking about dream data sources. This is what I do, I think. And so as Bonnie mentioned, you know, kind of understanding what they have. Honestly, so it would be connecting multiple administrative data sources. So right now we have this incredibly rich data that we have access to through the Chancellor's office. It undergirds much of the work that we do in the PPIC Higher Education Center. In theory, I will say, there could be opportunities where that information, and I will say there are versions of the COMAS data that is connected to EDD data, which allows us to look at quarterly wages. And we've used that in the past work. When I talked about high value credentials, we're actually connecting individual students with their quarterly earnings to understand what the value of this credential is. So we do have that. I would say in this space with the CalWORKs students, what would be really helpful is to also connect it with, say, county welfare systems, whether that's SAWS or perhaps state level systems through CDSS or the County Department of Social Services, so that we could see both on the college CalWORKs side, but also on the broader CalWORKs program, what students, where they are in their receipt of CalWORKs. So one of the other limitations we have is we only observe, as Bonnie said, whether a student is enrolled in a CalWORKs program at the college. It may be that in the 2 years prior and the 2 years after that college CalWORKs program, they may still be receiving CalWORKs benefits, but we don't know that. And so I would say kind of putting together different administrative sources, and in other policy areas, we've had some success in that. So, you know, the dream is linking everything together, and that just gives us a much richer base from which to do some of these, to conduct these types of analyses, so we can really start to uncover what is working and why. Well, I guess I'm going to say thank you now.
So if you have any questions, get them in right now. But I will say thank you so much for attending our program today. We are really proud of this work, and yeah, there's a lot more that can be done in this space, and we fully intend on doing that. So yeah, as I said earlier, our event slides, the report, it will be available on our website at ppic.org.